Early on in 2024, with the release of The End in the Death Volume 3, the sprawling saga that is the Horus Heresy finally reached its conclusion. Spanning dozens of mainline novels, along with countless short stories, audio dramas, and novellas, the series remains as beloved by fans as it is daunting for newcomers. As with any long-running series, opinions on quality are varied with each entry. Some books are beloved by the fans, whereas others are seen as forgettable. But one entry stands apart as the most divisive and controversial of them all, The Damnation of Pythos by David Annandale, first released in 2014. For years, this book has been the target of heavy criticism across the Warhammer fanbase. Many fans have gone as far as labeling it the worst Horus Heresy book ever written. But was this book really that bad? If it really is that bad, then what did it do that made so many fans viscerally angry? Is the novel actually a hidden gem that too many people have slept on? If it is, then why is it so misunderstood, and what is it actually trying to say? Was The Damnation of Pythos a rare misstep in an otherwise acclaimed series, or did it succeed in ways that readers weren't expecting? Well, I took it upon myself to read this book and figure out what the big deal was. I also did a bunch of research into fan sentiment and spoke to a bunch of heresy nerds at my local game store to get a better understanding of why the book is so controversial. As I'm not gonna lie to you, I actually kinda really enjoyed it. And true story, one of said nerds threatened me with a box cutter when I told them that. In this video, we're gonna dissect the controversy surrounding the Damnation of Pythos in order to figure out if it deserves its infamous reputation. But before we dive headfirst into the grimdark, unless you've been living under a rock recently, you've definitely heard of today's sponsor, Into the AM, makers of some of the best graphic tees you can get on the internet. You've also probably seen me wear them in pretty much every single video I make, and that's because they're easily my favorite shirts that I own, and I wear them pretty much every single day. They're stylish, comfortable, have a wide array of different designs, and because they're wash and fade resistant, even though I've had them for multiple years, they look just as good as the day I got them. They also don't advertise this part, but I'd say their shirts are about 20% longer than a normal t-shirt. Not enough to look out of place, but just enough that they don't rise up every single time you lift your arms up. My big and tall homies know exactly what I'm talking about. Whether you're already a big fan of Into the AM's designs, trying to find a gift for someone special in your life, or just want to upgrade your wardrobe, there's never been a better opportunity to do that, as Into the AM is celebrating 4th of July with a massive sale right now, with up to 60% off site-wide. And by the way, that includes all of their fresh new graphic drops as well. And here's the best part, because it gets a lot better for my viewers. If you click on my link in the description of this video, or use coupon code WesHammer at checkout, you can save an additional 10% off your entire order. And that coupon code stacks with all of the other deals you can find during the sale. So what are you waiting for? Elevate your style today by going to intotheam.com and using coupon code WesHammer at checkout, or click on the link in the description to save 10% off your entire order. Big thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Now back to the grimdark. In order to understand why The Damnation of Pythos is such a controversial book within the Horus Heresy, we first need to start with a summary of its plot and deeper themes. The story follows the remnants of several shattered Loyalist Space Marine legions, primarily the Iron Hands 111th Company, with surviving elements from the Salamanders and the Raven Guard in the aftermath of the drop site massacre on Isstvan V. Traumatized and directionless, these survivors, led by Iron Hands Captain Durin Atticus, aimlessly drift aboard the crippled strike cruiser the Veritas Ferrum, searching for purpose in a galaxy gone mad. Alongside him are his sergeants like Anton Galba, who becomes the novel's emotional and thematic anchor, and support staff including his astropath Rita and a wide cast of mortal serfs like Canshell and Agnes. The Veritas Ferrum itself is barely functional, a floating mausoleum filled with ghosts of fallen comrades and the philosophical ruin of the Iron Hand's core belief that emotion and flesh are weakness. Following a mysterious psychic signal, the ship enters the Pandorax system, a remote region near the Eye of Terror. Atticus and crew choose to investigate the source and make planetfall on a long-forgotten death world named Pythos, a planet dominated by impenetrable jungles and titanic carnivores. And if that wasn't bad enough, nothing about this place seems to make any kind of logical sense. The Saurians they encounter are unusually coordinated, and everything, even the plants and herbivores, hunger for flesh. Terrain shifts unpredictably, time seems inconsistent, and hallucinations increase among both Astartes and crew alike. But it's not just the monsters in the jungle that they have to fear. Something far darker is lingering here. something ancient and malevolent that's pressing against the thinning veil of reality, whispering words of madness in the night and preying on fear and despair. As the story unfolds, the horrors only escalate. Terrifying, unexplainable events push the mortal serfs to the brink of insanity, while straining the bonds of loyalty and brotherhood among the Space Marines. The shattered remnants of a legion must uncover the mystery of this cursed planet and survive long enough to get a signal back to Terra, or Pythos will become their tomb. What follows in this book is a slow-burn deconstruction of the Iron Hands and their doctrines, a deep dive into transhuman grief and trauma, and how both mortals and Astartes struggle to cope with a universe they no longer understand. All of this unfolds against the backdrop of a hostile world where quite literally everything is trying to kill them, and it all builds towards an absolutely bonkers ending that left me speechless, both in a good way and a very bad way. Not gonna lie, I had a lot of mixed feelings about this book when I first read it, and I walked away from it pretty angry. But don't you worry, we're gonna get into all that later in the video. Now, I'm gonna do my best to examine both sides of the argument when it comes to whether or not this book is actually good or completely pointless. But I'm letting you know up front that I did end up enjoying it, and I was kinda confused on why it had such a negative reputation, the crazy ending aside. I had to do a little bit more research into the meta discussion around the book itself, and from what I've been able to gather, a lot of the hatred for it stems from how Games Workshop originally mishandled its release. Now, I should clarify real quick that although I've been reading Warhammer books for years, I didn't start the Heresy until about 6 years ago. At the time, I had plenty of other 40K books to keep me occupied, and the Heresy felt kind of like a big commitment. I definitely wasn't one of those fans that was marking my calendar for each and every new entry. Now, after digging back through a lot of old message boards and forum posts from the mid-2010s for this video, it became pretty clear that at the time, fans who were reading the books as they came out felt the Heresy had started to lose its momentum. The recent books had all been kinda subpar at best, and many fans felt like the series was just dragging on with no clear end in sight. For context, the Damnation of Pythos is book number 30 in the series and released in 2014, 8 years after the Heresy officially began with Horus Rising. And by that point, they weren't even halfway through it. There was no Siege of Terra on the horizon, no roadmap, just endless speculation. Would it be another 10 years before we saw the battle between the Emperor and Horus? 20 years? Nobody knew. So when a new installment finally dropped and it turned out to be what many perceived as a filler episode, it's no surprise that fans were frustrated. After years of waiting, getting a side story instead of a major plot development, it felt like a slap in the face. Now, at the time, the frustration was totally justified. But nowadays, the mainline series has concluded. People jumping in within the last few years don't have to deal with that same level of frustration. Yet, hatred for this book in particular has continued to endure. So why is that? And I should clarify real quick because somebody's definitely going to bring it up in the comments section. But yeah, obviously Games Workshop is not really done with the Heresy. They're going to keep milking those sweet Primarch teats for another century. But as far as the core narrative is concerned, it's done. But I'm getting off topic. Out of the numerous complaints that Warhammer fans tend to bring up in discussions around this book, one accusation comes up far more than any other. And that's that the Damnation of Pythos is simply a filler arc that you can and should skip. Thus, it's a bad book. But is that really true? Is this book just filler, or is it a hidden gem? Mayhaps even essential reading. In nerd culture, filler is a very dirty word, is second only in hatred to the term retcon, but that's a topic for a different video. The term filler refers to content added to a story, broadcast, or a publication purely to fill space or pad out the runtime. By its design, filler doesn't significantly advance the plot, and because of that, it's often seen as less important and engaging compared to the rest of the narrative. Filler episodes are often considered non-canon, and when implemented poorly, can disrupt pacing of pivotal events. Now, that's the version of filler that most people think of when you hear that term, but filler isn't always a bad thing. In fact, when done well, it can be a powerful tool for world building, and, in an ironic twist, can actually improve pacing. Good filler slows things down just enough to let the audience breathe and get more immersed in the universe, rather than rushing from one major plot point to the next. Filler gives creators the space to explore the setting beyond the constraints of the main plot, offering the audience deeper understanding of the world, its cultures, history, and everyday lives. These quieter moments can flesh out side characters or show how the universe operates outside of constant high-stakes conflict. In a grimdark setting like Warhammer 40K or the Heresy, a so-called filler story might focus on the daily horror of Hive City life, or the psychological and physical toll that Horus's rebellion takes on the countless worlds within the Imperium. It's one thing to tell us that the War Master has burned 100 planets, but it's far more impactful when the story takes time to show us this, and then lets us linger in the wreckage. When done well, filler doesn't detract from the story. It adds texture, depth, and emotional weight, enriching the main narrative when it finally returns. Whether it's done well or poorly though, filler is usually much more easier to define in a traditional story with a single author and a clear narrative thread. But the Horus Heresy is anything but traditional. It has dozens of authors and exists less as a singular story and more so as a sprawling tapestry of narratives, hundreds of tales that weave in and out of each other, often told out of chronological order with wildly different tones, styles, and focal points. With all that said, it's difficult for me to call the Damnation of Pythos filler. Despite what a lot of fans claim, it does have some lasting impacts on the macro narrative, including the creation and introduction of a powerful demonic entity that appears in future books, and actually ends up being the one that attempts to corrupt Sanguinius. It also deepens the lore surrounding the warp's influence and the creeping long-term corruption of the galaxy. Aside from this though, I'll admit it doesn't really do a lot to push the main plot forward. But what it lacks in forward momentum, it more than makes up for by doubling down on and expanding the Heresy's core themes and grimdark tone. It enriches the emotional and thematic texture of the setting without pulling focus away from the main narrative. In other words, if it is filler, it's the best kind. The Heresy thrives on existential dread, crushing futility, and cosmic horror. But those elements are often buried beneath more traditional war stories lurking in the subtext. The Damnation of Pythos bucks that trend by dragging them into the spotlight. It zooms in on a broken band of survivors, betrayed by their former brothers, cut off from the Imperium, and slowly unraveling in a hostile, unknowable galaxy, all while carrying the overwhelming grief of losing their Primarch and their Legion. I'm just gonna speak for me personally, but when I'm reading books in the Horus Heresy, I don't just power through them to see what happens next. I want to be fully immersed in every single moment. I want to be focused on the experience rather than just racing to the finish line. To me, a story's tone and themes are just as important as the plot itself. Atmosphere and world building are critical for my personal immersion and overall enjoyment, especially in something as dense and rich as the Heresy. If these things weren't important to me, I wouldn't be reading the books in the first place. I'd just go get a summary of them off of the wiki. I'd knock it out in 20 minutes and get on with my day. So even though I said I do struggle to call this book filler, mostly because of the negative connotation that surrounds that word, I will admit that it's a fair accusation, even if I'll caveat that with it's the good kind of filler. I think it does serve a very important purpose in the series and shouldn't be skipped. But ultimately, whether or not it's filler really isn't that important. That's only a single argument that its detractors bring up. So other than that, why does Pythos have such a negative reputation? And I'm glad you asked that, my friend, because up until this point, I feel like I've been glazing this book pretty hard, and I've been doing all these mental gymnastics trying to defend it, and I'm tired. Don't get it twisted, I'm still gonna try to do that because I did like this one, but in fairness, there's a lot of reasons why people would justifiably hate this book. So let's get into it. Also, quick heads up, I'm going to be talking spoilers from here on out, so if you actually want to read this one for yourself and don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and turn this video off now and I'll catch you in the next one. First off, and we'll get this one out of the way quick as we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, yes, the Damnation of Pythos doesn't really contain any major plot developments, barring the exception of the birth of the demon I mentioned before. Other than that, it's completely self-contained. And while I couldn't confirm this with an official source, there's a widely shared rumor online that this book was never intended to be a mainline entry in the series. Supposedly, David Annandale set out to write a side story in the Tales of Heresy mold, one where he wouldn't be constrained by the overarching narrative and could explore more experimental storytelling. But then, once he had finished it, marketing got involved, and they figured it would sell better if they put the Horus Heresy stamp on it. Again, take that with a grain of salt. I couldn't find anything concrete on it, but it would go a long way towards explaining why this book feels so out of place compared to the rest of the series. The second major thing that Pythos has going against it is that it's the closest thing we have to an actual horror story within the Horus Heresy. It arguably would have fit more comfortably into the Warhammer horror line of novels from the Black Library, but that didn't exist back then. Now, horror is my favorite genre. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you know I love the spooky stuff. And when I found out that there was a Horus Heresy horror book, I'm not gonna lie, I got pretty excited. That's definitely something that's up my alley. But I also recognize that that's not what this series is primarily known for. And as such, that type of title was always going to be divisive. Even within the group that enjoys horror, everyone's got their own personal taste. Pythos is a slow burn, creeping dread psychological horror, which is right up my alley. I love when a book really takes its time to build up its creepy atmosphere and make each of its action set pieces feel earned. But other fans may find those scenes too few and far between, and may find the overall story meandering, long-winded, and ultimately boring. The major takeaway is that a slow, meditative, philosophically dense horror novel, buried deep in a series known for bombastic battles and Primarch drama, was never going to please everyone. Another ironic issue that Pythos has is that despite being one of the most straightforward plots in the entire series, Space Marines crash on a death world, build a fort, and things go horribly wrong, is also one of the most thematically complex. You've got a central debate amongst the Iron Hands, machine versus humanity, logic versus emotion, detachment versus compassion. What does it mean to be a Space Marine? Are they weapons, defenders? Do they care about the people they protect? Or is that a weakness? On top of that, you've also got a whole subplot with the mortal serfs that explores the nature of faith, how it can offer strength in dark times, but also become a path towards damnation if misplaced. In addition, we're exploring grief and trauma. The book asks, how do you recover when everything you believed in has collapsed, when your Primarch is dead, your brothers are shattered, and the galaxy no longer makes sense? It deals with religious extremism, cosmic dread, identity loss, and it does all this while still telling a story about Space Marines fighting dinosaurs in an alien jungle, while a malevolent warp entity gets its kicks by constantly with them and driving their serfs to kill themselves in increasingly graphic ways. One dude literally has such a bad dream that he wakes up, puts both of his hands in his mouth, and literally pulls his own head apart. But I'm getting sidetracked again. Annandale juggles all of these threads as best he can, and I think he succeeds more often than not. But the sheer amount of concepts, themes, and existential dilemmas he asks the reader to carry beneath what looks like a simple survival story can be kind of overwhelming. For some fans, it feels like the book doesn't know what it wants to be, and I'll admit, I personally did lose the plot a few times here and there, and had to reread several chapters. There is, however, one theme that this book absolutely nails, better than any book in the Heresy, and arguably better than most books in all of Warhammer 40K. It's the theme of mankind's ultimate futility in the face of an uncaring galaxy. Pythos is brutal, it is relentlessly bleak, and it ends with literally everyone dying. All those deep philosophical questions it asks you to consider, they don't matter in the end. Not because the questions weren't meaningful, but because chaos doesn't care. The warp doesn't care. And in this story, your ideas, your values, your growth, they're all ultimately meaningless in the eyes of the cosmos. The main character, Galba, who we've watched struggle to find the balance between emotion and logic, between the ideals of the machine and the nature of humanity, is ultimately punished for his indecisiveness and is brutally killed in the third act. The Salamander character in this book, who represents the human side of this debate, at one point argues for the defending of and taking in of a group of pilgrims, because if the Space Marines don't do something, they'll surely get eaten. The Iron Hands don't want to do this as it's a liability, but the Salamander argues that if they don't protect mankind, then they're just as bad as the traitors. Makes sense, right? Like, we can kind of get on board with that logic. It's kind of a heroic thing to do. Well, it's later revealed that they were all Chaos cultists, and by protecting them, they kind of ushered in the apocalypse and everyone's gonna die. So the Salamander is punished as well. Captain Atticus, who is more machine than man, and the only human part of him left is a single eye, who definitely represents the machine side of this whole argument, dies condemning flesh as weakness, blaming sentiment for their downfall. Yet earlier in the story, he's the one who makes a cold logical decision to obliterate an alien relic with an orbital bombardment, even though it's beneath all of the previously mentioned pilgrims, who at this point in the story are just viewed as everyone else. They're just simple refugees. They don't know they're cultists. Anyways, the relic reflects the blast back up into space and one-shots their ship, which was their only way off of this uncharted planet. His emotionalist decision ended up sealing their fate. So no matter what side the characters fall on this philosophical argument, they all end up punished. Another great example of this is the mortal serf character that we follow, who gives us the baseline human perspective throughout the story. Now, he starts off as a skeptic of religion that looks upon the cult of emperor worship that has taken root amongst the other serfs as an atrocity that goes against everything they've been taught. However, throughout the course of the story, he learns to find beauty in faith, how it brings comfort to those in dire circumstances, and by the end of the book, he's a full-on believer in the God Emperor. He honestly kinda dips into the zealot category for how extreme his faith becomes, and ironically, it kinda helps him out. He ends up being the only actual survivor after the demonic incursion at the end of the story. It's implied that this was because of his unwavering faith. But in a cruel twist, what does that actually get him? He ends up getting carted off by demons at the very end of the book, presumably to be tortured for all eternity. So Pythos asks you all of these deep philosophical questions and then guides you through both sides of the argument before ultimately throwing it all out the window and telling you that the real theme of this book was that everything is pointless, everything is hopeless. To try to make sense of a galaxy in the throes of madness is an exercise in profound futility. To really hammer this point home, the epilogue goes even harder. It's revealed that the astropath character was able to get one final message out before they all died, and eventually it is intercepted by the Imperium. The first guy listening to the message hears a word that strikes him as odd. It's never revealed to us what that word is, but he finds it archaic and disturbing. He brings the message to a higher up, claiming that it's probably important, but the other guy thinks it's a prank and throws it away. Everything our heroes went through, all of the suffering that they endured, was ultimately for nothing. They died pointless, non-heroic deaths and would go on unremembered. So yes, The Damnation of Pythos is a hard book to love. It's experimental, it's emotionally punishing, and it's divisive by design. Even those of us who stand by it, who genuinely believe it's a hidden gem that shouldn't be skipped, can still fully understand why so many readers disliked it. But that doesn't make it bad, it makes it honest. This is what a true grimdark story looks like, one that refuses to play by the rules of heroism or narrative satisfaction. Pythos isn't here to entertain you, it's not here to deliver catharsis or offer answers. It's a horror story in the purest sense, one that doesn't want you to feel relief when it's over. It wants you to feel violated. It wants you to be uncomfortable, to be frustrated, to walk away angry and hollow. It wants you to hate it, and then ask yourself, why? And that's the point. Because in a universe ruled by madness, betrayal, and cosmic indifference, what else could a story like this be? It forces you to sit in your discomfort, to marinate in the bleakness, to reckon with a galaxy where nothing you do matters, and nothing you believe in can save you. It doesn't just tell you what grimdark is, it makes you live in it. Or who knows, maybe I totally missed the mark with this one, and this book's actually ass, and I've just read way too deep into it. If you have any strong opinions on this book, or any other Horus Heresy book for that matter, definitely let me know your thoughts about it down in the comment section. Like I said, this one is pretty divisive, and I'm genuinely curious to hear what y'all's take on it is. Do you think there's room for more experimental books like this one, or do you think the series is at its best when it sticks to the classics? As much as I thoroughly enjoyed this book and I tried to argue that it's not really filler, ironically, it does have a whole filler segment in it where they leave the planet to go fight the Emperor's children before coming back. That whole thing could be ripped out and thrown away. It's utterly pointless. Which, now that I think about it, is kind of ironic. Anyways, as always, leave all of your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, and ideas for future videos down in the comment section below. If you made it all the way to the end of the video and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet and you think I've earned it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like the video as well while you're at it. Also check out one of the other two videos here in the end screen. Anyways, big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.